Hi, I'm Chris Bisha, 360degreesound.com. We're here in Austin at South by Southwest 2023, and today I've got the pleasure of speaking with filmmaker Ron Chapman. His new documentary, Revival69, premiered at the fest. So Ron, what was your inspiration for making Revival69? What drew you to the story?
Well, I'd made a bunch of music documentaries before, and after I finished my last music doc, Who the Fuck is Arthur Fogel, this was the next one that I really wanted to pursue. I'm a Canadian, and I love making films that are Canadian, yet of international significance, as was the Fogel film. And in this particular case, I think there can't, one of the most important international stories that was Canadian, that was relatively unknown throughout the world. And so to be able to bring that story to the world was really my major impetus. This festival was called the second most important event in rock history by Rolling Stone, and nobody pretty much knows it existed or what happened. And I'm also fascinated by backstory, so like in the Fogel film, I didn't really concentrate as much on the artists and their story as much as the behind the scenes, how this thing came to be. And it's like a time capsule, going back and seeing what happened in '69, how concerts came together, what people were able to do, the disposition of the artists themselves and what they would do compared to what happens today. Now it's corporate, rock. The corporations have taken over the concert business, the Live Nations and the AEGs, and then back in the day, you had these individual concert promoters in every territory that sort of curated the kind of talent that came into their territory, that they exposed their audiences to. You have Ticketmaster now, and back then you had your local record store, and when there was a concert, it was a local record store that sold you your tickets, and the guy behind the counter at the record store was the guy who told you what was the cool music to listen to and what the latest stuff was. There's a whole different kind of community, and now, lawyers and accountants took over the A&R departments of the record businesses and displaced all those great icons who built the business based on their incredible great gut feel. And so all of these things, these things are so interesting to sort of look at the now and look at the then. And this film takes you back to then when, anything was really possible, like a 21-year-old promoter getting on the phone and actually getting John Lennon on the line. How many people could just get on the phone and get Bono or any one of the, the top artists on the line and get through their security and all that. Like that had happened, that could never happen today. And how many acts, to look at John Lennon, John Lennon, who really epitomized the spirit of rock and roll, was and grew up on that. How many artists today would make a decision that they would, fuck yeah, I'll go do that, and I'll go play a festival in 2 days with a band that I've never played with before, a band I've never rehearsed with before. I'll get in front of 25,000 people, we'll just go out there and we'll do our thing. And, it'll be great, we'll play some rock. I think all of those things, would not happen today, and I think that it's just so fascinating to have a look at how things have changed. What was possible then and what is possible now. And I think by looking at what happened then, especially for the younger generations, the kids coming up and stuff who are fascinated by this kind of history, they get a sense of maybe how to go forward a little better, as opposed to just saying, I'll accept whatever comes of it.
Yeah, it is fascinating that you focused on John Bauer. It's really John Bauer's story. And like the moment in the film where he borrows money from Edjo, the biker, just amped up the tension so much, And what was Kelly? What's his partner's name?
Well, there was John Brown and Kenny Walker.
Kenny Walker. Yeah. Kenny Walker's like, if you do this, you're on your own.
That's it. Yeah, and again, there's that kind of spirit. This was not a business to those people back in the day as much as it was just a passion. And it's very much more business first now. I know people come to it with passion still, but back then this was a developing business. This was the first years of concerts. There weren't even big, and this was not a concert, this was a festival. So the first year of festivals, and yeah, his partner, wouldn't support him, the backers wouldn't support him. He went, well, man, this thing has got to happen. I'm going to make it happen. So he went to a biker and borrowed the money, as opposed to a bank, because it was, they were set up, they were a big corporation, they had borrowing power and all that stuff. He didn't have that.
Yeah.
He just had the passion.
Yeah, and it's interesting they say that it wasn't a business. They say a number of times it was all about having lunch.
Right.
And there's a great scene where the reporter is like, "We can pick an apple or a pear, like right out of the box," So that's really charming, and it is a look back at how we started in rock, and I like how you're talking about where we've come now. But you mentioned that it's a historic event. And in fact, the title is The Concert That Rocked the World. How is it that, I didn't know about the film, about the concert. How is it that so many of us are unfamiliar with this historic event?
Well, it's interesting because, you're from Detroit, and actually the two places that were most impacted by the concert at the time was Toronto and Detroit, for reasons when people see the film, they'll understand. But it's the same in Toronto. Most people in Toronto have no idea about the story. It's a 54-year-old story, all things being real, but it is still, a 54-year-old story with some of the greatest rock icons of anyone's time in them. And I think what really happened is, this festival that occurred was sort of sandwiched in between all the promise of Woodstock, because that happened just before it, and after that, sort of the horror and the of Altamont, really. And that summer after Woodstock, which just took up the news forever, and there's been like 5 different films made about the festival, or 6 different films still. They keep regurgitating all of that stuff, which is fine, but those are the stories they have. This festival, and it happened in Toronto. It happened at the last minute that John ended up becoming a part of it, so nobody was really ready for it. There was no American press there, because they were kind of fatigued. It's just happening over in Canada. There's a rock and roll revival, sort of like, who cares? The Doors were thrown on at the last minute. They were not someone that anyone wanted to cover at that point because of reasons you find out at the end of the film. Mm-hmm. So, I think there was actually very little press there. When I did archival, very few pictures, there was very little to find, other than, of course, D.A. Pennebaker and his footage. D.A. heard about this. He was originally just a rock and roll revival. He brought together Jerry Lee Lewis, Bo Diddley, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and Jerry Lee Lewis, and these were his
Gene Vincent.
I'm sorry, and these were his heroes, his icons. And even though he had done "Don't Look Back" with Bob Dylan, which changed the language of documentary filmmaking, it was considered one of the greatest docs ever. Monterey Pop, which was hugely successful. He went, wow, those things were great, but I'm going to go and shoot these guys, and this is going to be my biggest, most successful film ever. And so he scrambled for like 2 weeks to get enough money to take a crew to Toronto and pay for the film, and he did that. He went to Toronto. We shot the concert, very much like a concert shoot, not like his other stuff behind the scenes, but the concert part. And it ended up, bankrupting him, actually, because it was a failure as a film at the time, because nobody was really interested in seeing these guys in a film, because after this concert, they sort of got revived. They went back out on the circuit, and you'd see them play everywhere. So people go, well, why would I go see a film when I could just go see them play,
Yeah, so you mentioned D.A. Pennebaker, and it looks like you worked primarily with the footage that Pennebaker shot. And I know he made his film, it's called Sweet Toronto, correct? And so just kind of wondering how, you also credit him in the film as being the father of cinema verite.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering how his film and the work that he did influenced the film that you made.
It didn't, actually, his film, I got access. Well, I went to D.A. Pennebaker when I started this project. I brought him on as an executive producer, along with his wife, Chris Hegedus, who was a partner also, and Fraser Pennebaker's son, so I could get access to the original footage. After the film came out, he was bankrupted by it. It was such a failure, and his partnership split up with Leacock at the time. put all the film footage in boxes, and they send them off to this storage facility called Iron Mountain, where it was not cataloged and just sort of stayed in the depths of that ever since. I got then access to all of that footage, so there was about 60 hours of 16 mil footage, plus I discovered about 2.5 hours of Super 8 tape that had never been processed before, where a lot of those scenes at the airport and stuff like that with the bikers, a lot of that stuff came from, and the backstage was a lot of those cameras also. So that was the footage that I used to bring people into the moment, because aside from just telling the backstory, they had to sort of feel they were in the moment, and there were certain things, iconic things that happened in some of those performances that I wanted to reference in the film itself. But certainly, again, D.A. Pennebaker really was, I'm going to shoot the concert, and he shot the concert while they were playing, and that was it. This film is very different. This is a narrative, this is a story, this is a rock and roll roller coaster ride, really. It never lets up. It starts and it just keeps ramping up until the end.
Yeah. And before we let you go, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, one of the most historic bits in the film is what happens with John Lennon after the concert and the decision that he made. It was very emotional for me. How did you react, watching that footage when you first saw it?
Oh, there's tons of. To me, the whole thing is emotional. When I started this film 6 years ago, it's been like a 6-year process. If you saw my original proposal, I was going to, and it was a touch. I was going to interview Chuck Berry. I was going to interview Little Richard. I was going to interview D.A. Pennebaker. They were going to be a living part of that story. That 4 main characters died by the time I got going with the film. So seeing all of them on screen and knowing that they're no longer with us, is really emotional. And certainly watching John, not just John, but John and Yoko, because I think one of the things I really wanted to do in this film, I'm actually a huge Yoko fan. I think she's a brilliant artist. She was known as a brilliant artist in her country. She came over to England, and because of her relationship with John, was vilified, really. And only people in the art world really understood her value as an artist. And she did things that people just didn't get here because she was so far ahead of her time, including some of the things that happened in that performance, which people thought was hellacious and awful and terrible because they just didn't understand it. They were sort of North American, and they hadn't been exposed to that kind of performance art before. They didn't live in that space, so they could look at it and see it for what it was. So, it's pretty emotional, and very emotional for me also, just because of D.A. Pennebaker, because he said at the time, like, he wouldn't talk about this in interviews after. He never wanted to talk about it because it bankrupted him, his biggest failure. He didn't talk about it with his family even, really. I spoke to Chris and stuff, and Fraser, and they said he just rarely even mentioned the thing. But the one thing I do know is at the time, he said, look, I'm really proud of this work, and this is the right film and the right thing to do at the wrong time. And at some point in time, this will be so important, to have these guys, these 5 guys on stage, and the rest of them that he ended up getting at the same time, it will be recognized, and it will have its place. And so, very much to me, it's a great sadness that D.A. Pennebaker especially couldn't be here to see, because his instincts as a filmmaker were impeccable and great, and he was right. He was just, again, like Yoko was, ahead of his time in realizing the importance of that footage. And when you see the story, and when you see his footage in the context of that story, you understand the importance of what he did, like that. Again, just like Lennon, he went, I got to do this, and he figured out a way to do it. Again, so much indicative of the time when you get an instinct, you get an inspiration, you make it happen, right? You don't go through 3 years of grant submissions and I'll do this and I'll do that, and then think that maybe it'll happen. You go, so.
Well, I thank you for going through the 3 years of grant submissions and the
6 years.
6 years, the red tape that you have to go through to be able to do that. And it seems like an honor for you as a filmmaker to be able to bring that around
It is.
for Pennebaker
It is.
and actually realize the vision that he had at the time.
It is.
What a thrill as a filmmaker. So I really appreciate you talking with us.
My pleasure.
And
love sharing it.
yeah, I wish you a lot of success, and we'll look forward to hearing about distribution and how people can see this great film.
Coming up very soon. We're just finishing a deal right
Okay.
now, so there will be an announcement in a week or two.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for joining us here in Austin on the ground at South by Southwest 2023. I'm Chris Bisha from 360degreesound.com. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.